to this very interesting conversation, a series of strategic dialogue that will take place, that have been curated, in fact, by me in association and collaboration with USI, United Services Institute, India's oldest military think tank, which has made phenomenal contribution to how military warfare techniques have been evaluated, considered, and the view going forward as well. Joining me on the show is Director of USI, Major General B.K. Sharma, a man who understands military warfare very well, somebody who understands China very well as a China watcher. He spent time in locations at the border, understanding how Chinese think, and that's exactly what this episode of Strategic Dialogue will focus on. Why the Galwan clash took place, the past and the history behind the Indo-Chinese ties, and what lies ahead. Major General B.K. Sharma, thank you so much for taking out the time for this episode of Strategic Dialogue.
Thank you very much, Gaurie. It is a privilege to be with you on the show. And I think it is a great opportunity both for USI and you to work together in tandem to bring out issues of profound strategic nature in the public consciousness. And that is how we will play our role. So with that, I'm ready for your questions and we could proceed.
Wonderful, sir. You know, to really talk about the Indo-Chinese ties, we've got to set back and talk about the past, the present, and then probably gauge into what really could be the future as well. But before any of that, I want to understand from you, sir, why exactly did the Galwan clash of 2020 take place? What do you think was really the tipping point that led to that June crisis? Which of course has de-escalated a little, but since then there's been so much of back and forth. In your assessment, why really did that Galwan clash take place of 15 June?
This is the most fundamental question that we need to reflect upon and answer. And my understanding is that this decision to resort to military aggression at the LAC has been taken at the very apex level, and that is by Xi Jinping at the China's Board of Military Commission level. Now, why this decision has been taken, it has to be seen in the context of China's larger global design. And where does India fit into that overall strategic calculus of China? It is common knowledge that China wants to be a preeminent Asian power and it wants to be a major power in the bipolarity in the world. Now, it looks at the world, as Mao said, the primary contradiction and the secondary contradiction. And for it, the primary contradiction is the United States of America and secondary contradiction is India. Now, they perceive that India is part of a grand encirclement design being weaved by United States of America. And that is where whatever statements on the Indo-Pacific, Quad, signing of Lee-MOA, COMCASA, and perhaps BICA, these kind of agreements, these are seen by Chinese as part of that grand encirclement design. Coupled with this, they also look at India as a firm base for whipping up any anti-China sentiment in Tibet, because you have Dalai Lama here and you have nearly 115,000 people of diaspora. Then another factor which came into play was India's impetus to infrastructure development on the border, as also making certain very bold statements in regard to Gilgit-Baltistan. And you know that China is de facto a third party today in Kashmir imbroglio. And therefore, these were the baskets of issues which probably went into Chinese calculations. And then they were looking for a window of opportunity, and that window of opportunity came their way during Corona period, when they realize that rest of the world is in a mess. So is India going through a major corona crisis. This is an ideal window of opportunity for China to flex its military muscle and test Indian waters. And it is with this reason that they resorted to military buildup right from January onwards. And earlier they used to do these military exercises along the Kunlun mountain ranges, which is astride Western Highway. This time they came much forward, and it was in consonance with the new directive of Xi Jinping, that is to carry out realistic mobilization and military training. So that is how they came, and they went into that maximalist position of 1960 line, you know, which they had achieved in 1960. And therefore, they resorted to achieving all those areas of 1960 claim line. And that is how this massive build-up and this encroachment on our side of the LAC took place. But there was a little bit of miscalculation on part of Chinese. They were never anticipating that Indian army in such a short span of time will be able to respond and checkmate their ingress at the line of control. So this in nutshell is what has happened. Now, where are we at the moment? As you know that we have 4 series of Corps Commander levels talk.
Yes.
Concurrently with that, our NSA has spoken to their foreign minister. And we also have this working group on consultation and cooperation on the border. Those talks at the joint secretary level have taken place. Presently, as we stand today, some disengagement has taken place in Galwan sector. That is that PP area of 15, 14, 17 alpha. So that disengagement has taken. However,
Pangong so is where the problem is.
Presently, there are 2 areas, problem areas. One is Dapsang, where they have come to that area of Y junction, about 15 kilometers, the line they claim. And that is the area of bottleneck. So we are not talking much about that as yet. And second is, you know, their presence at Finger 4. They thinned out a bit, but they still remain at Finger 4. And we are going through very complex and intricate kind of negotiations with them so that they go back and the status quo ante is established at the border. But in the meanwhile, I would just culminate this argument by saying that India has responded militarily exponentially well, and we are very well poised today to checkmate Chinese ingress, and should the need be, probably do some quid pro quo action so that we are well poised at the negotiation table to deal with them from a state of parity.
Okay, that's how it happened. Yes, there was essentially infrastructure building positioned by Indian government as far as Article 370 is concerned. And I want to quickly take 30 seconds to tell our viewers that when you talk about Jammu Kashmir, General Sharma is absolutely right when he says that China is also, for better or for worse, become a stakeholder simply because, you know, of the Aksai Chin area, which is about 35,000 square kilometers of area. 15% belongs to China, 55% is right now with India, and 30% has been occupied by Pakistan illegally. So Major General Sharma is absolutely right. So to that effect, after Article 370, it did sort of have some sort of an impact on the Chinese thinking. And you know, if we were to now take a step back, General Sharma, and explain to our viewers watching this, that a lot of people may think that, you know, it almost looked like China and India are now sort of moving together. There is the Wuhan summit, then there was the Wuhan feeling, and then followed by the Mahabalipuram summit, and, you know, the Chennai Connect as it was called. But the fact is, you go back 50 years in time, there have been enough and more thorny issues, from disconnect and disagreement on what is really our border to a whole host of other issues, from Arunachal to Ladakh. Let's take this step by step. Your first assessment of why is it that India and China have not been able to address the basic boundary issue. We speak from Johnson Line What is it that the Chinese speak on? Explain to us, sir.
See, the first and foremost thing here is that fundamentally Chinese are not interested in resolving the boundary dispute with us, because it is a very strong leverage with them, which they can use from time to time to extract certain concessions from India, right? And there are two very important factors which play into Chinese mind. One, that is the Dalai Lama factor. Unless his succession issue and the attendant issues that are thrown up from that are not resolved, and they are not very comfortable with the assimilation of Tibet, they will keep the border issue burning. The second issue is Pakistan factor. The moment you resolve your boundary issue, then all our attention will get diverted towards Pakistan. So they are looking at this like a package, kind of a deal, a triangular kind of an arrangement, wherein we are also able to sort of have some kind of a compromise with Pakistanis. Otherwise, their whole area, this project of CPAC and all, will always remain under threat if relations between Pakistan and India not improve. But let's go into a little bit of a historical perspective. And from historical perspective, if you map all the events that have taken place right from 49 till 2020, one thing that is common is that Chinese have been taking us for a ride. They've induced from time to time us in a state of complacency, and they have used the windows in between for what they call is the creeping assertiveness on the border, and what they call is 2 steps forward and 1 step backward. And from 49 to 59, as you know, about 54, we signed Panchsheel agreement with them. And the central feature of Panchsheel agreement was that respect, the sovereignty and peaceful coexistence. But then 62 happened. 62
Yes.
shouldn't have happened. And there were two factors which led to 62. One was India granting asylum to Dalai Lama. And that was the making of Chinese. It was not Indian making that he came to India. And second factor which came into play was when, they started claiming that 1960 claim line when Chavan Lai came to India in November 59. And subsequently, they went for that maximalist position, totally ignoring the Johnson line,
Yes.
totally ignoring the McCartney line. And then they had a very, very ambitious, the new line, which India rejected, Prime Minister Nehru, and then we know Morarji Desai and Vice President Radhakrishnan, Balubhai Pant, all these people, they did not accede to that. And then they went back and they started making preparations, and India also resorted to its forward policy. And then 1962 happened. Now, I just want to tell you the decision of going to 1962 war was taken on 6th of October at a war council meeting which was chaired by Mao Zedong. And what were the objectives of 1962? First, in Ladakh sector, reclaim the entire territory up to 1960 claim line, that is entire Aksai Chin. And in the Eastern Theater, render a crushing military defeat to India ahead of McMahon line, and then withdraw. That decisions were taken right in the beginning. So in Ladakh sector, they used about 2 divisions plus, and they came right up to Galwan, and there were major battles at Razangla, Pangong, Galwan Valley, Chip Chop, and they came up to that claim line within about a month's time. And ultimately, they went back about 20 kilometers to the previous line.
Right.
In the Eastern Theater, the center of gravity of their operations was Tawang.
Yes.
And therefore, they mobilized about 3.5 divisions. There were about 2 thrust lines which came into Tawang sector. And there was I would say, a subsidiary thrust line which came towards Walong area, that was basically to tie down our reserves.
Yes.
And major battles that were fought were at Bumla, at Sela and Bomdila.
Mm.
and there was also a major battle in Wolong. So they came about 60 kilometers inside,
Mm.
but then they withdrew and went back, sort of a McMahon line, after they
Yes.
had brought about a politico-military paralysis of Indian establishment.
Right.
So these were the military aims. Now, beyond 62, then, our relations were quite strained. And then
Yes.
came 1967.
Mm.
At 1967, the provocations from Chinese started at Jelapla Pass,
Yes.
Nathula Pass, and Chola Pass in Sikkim. And for whatever reason, we withdrew from Jelapla, which was occupied by China. But we had very strong military leader, the divisional commander, General Sagat Singh, who refused to withdraw from Nathula and Chola, and we started laying that fence there. Those incidents took place from between 11th of September to 14th of September 67,
Mm.
when Chinese could not push us back and sort of deter us from laying the fencing. Then they went back, and then suddenly they opened fire and they killed about
Yes.
66 of our people. And
That's
then there
correct.
was a massive retaliation from the Indian
Mm.
side. And the sum total of the whole encounter was that we suffered about 88 casualties, and Chinese lost nearly 400 people in that.
Yes.
So this was a very, very befitting reply to Chinese at Nathula. Then the next incident which actually took place, and that was in 1986-87,
Yes.
and that was what we
Tawang.
call is the Sumdrungchung incident.
Mm.
Now, Indira Gandhi had taken a very strong
Mm.
decision. She ordered Indian military to deploy forward along Hatungla Ridge line to defend Tawang.
Tawang.
As
Yes.
part of those forays,
Mm.
what Indian Army did, we went to the Samdrungchu and we established a military post there.
Mm.
But in winters, we used to vacate that post. But in 1986, when we went to reoccupy the post, we found the Chinese were sitting there tight and in
Yes.
large strength, and they refused to withdraw. Now they were thinking that India will buckle down under their pressure, but that time the credit goes to our military leadership, and particularly
Yes.
General Sundarji, who was a very dynamic leader. So we went into a major military build-up, and we
Yes.
used air resources to mobilize our troops. That exercise, checkerboard, and all took place.
Yes.
And we sized up to Chinese, and this lingered on. So then
Mm.
Deng Xiaoping had already decided to go to war, and our war preparations were afoot. But when the Chinese realized that Indians are very, very serious and more than prepared, probably over a period of time, they turned cold feet. And that is how
Backed off.
1988,
Yes.
Rajiv Gandhi's visit took place. And it took us 7 years then to de-escalate from there.
Yes.
In
In fact,
between, we had, yeah, yeah.
in fact, I want to ask you this, that, for better or for worse, we share, about 3,488 kilometers of border with China, from about west of Karakoram Highway all the way till, of course, the Indo-Myanmar Chinese border. It's a long border, and as you've been telling us, these skirmishes that have taken place in the last 50 years, should that then make us very aware of the challenges that exist right now? Because between these there have been lighter skirmishes as well that have taken place. It's been a very thorny equation between India and China, hasn't it?
Absolutely, because you see, ultimately also they have been doing creeping assertiveness in Sikkim and plateau area. I don't want to repeat what happened in Dapsang in 2013, 2014 at Chomar, 2017 it happened at Doklam, and now we have 2020. But one lesson that emerges: most of these military assertions have coincided with a political statement. There was a total synergy between China's military establishment and their political authority to leverage some of these incidents. So there is a strategy at work, and that strategy is keep the heat on India and extract maximum concessions out of it. And you see, all those agreements that we had signed with Chinese, whether it was 1993, that BPTA agreement, or it was 1996, the military CBMs, or it was 2003,
2005.
that is the Declaration on Principles for Relations and Constructive Cooperation, in which it was very clearly enunciated that we are not a threat to each other and we will not resort to military use. And subsequently, 2005, there was
Yes.
another agreement that was political parameters and guiding principles for settlement of India-China boundary question, in which Chinese alluded that we will not tinker with settled population. But if you
Yes.
recall, in 2006, when Hu Jintao, the president of China, was to visit India, the ambassador in Delhi made a statement that every inch of that territory, what you called is Arunachal Pradesh,
It's Chinese,
belongs to
yes.
China. Belongs to China. And
Yes.
then subsequently, you know, we have about 23 rounds of special representative
Yes.
talks and the talks in between. So at the end of the day, we had Mamlapuram and we had Wuhan, and they very clearly at the highest level, two things were brought out: that we will maintain the strategic communication, and also we will give guidelines to our troops to maintain peace and
Yes.
tranquility. And what has happened in 2020 is totally 180-degree opposite of what Chinese have been saying, and they have
Basically,
been
those agreements
assuring.
have zero value now. In fact, I was reading up some of those agreements. The 1996 Article 10 of that agreement says that both sides will speed up clarification for what really is LAC. Even that hasn't been done. The only effort I was going through that when was the last time a definite attempt was made to define the boundary. It was about 30 years back, and when the discussion took place, in 20 minutes the Chinese side withdrew the map that they had put out for any discussion, simply because there was just such a divergent view on what really is the boundary. Before we talk about, what lies ahead in terms of Indo-Chinese ties, sir, I want to ask you this, General Sharma, that there is a perception that in 1963, the McMahon line was accepted by the Chinese, by the CCP, when it came to their boundary issues with Myanmar. But the same McMahon line is not acceptable, or there seems to be such a divergent view when it comes to boundary with India.
Uh, Chinese are not honest in settling the border dispute with India, as I said earlier. And if you recall, in 2010, they had truncated India's border with China to 2,000 kilometers from, what you call as a 3, 4, 5, 8 kilometers. Because they showed the entire area which is along the LOC actually as part of Pakistan.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Even naming CPAC as China-Pakistan Economic Corridor de facto implied that it is part of Pakistan. Then they've been raising claim about Tawang and other areas as part of southern Tibet. And just about 2 years back, they had published maps in which they had renamed all the areas of Arunachal Pradesh with the Chinese names, right?
Yes, yes.
So therefore, I don't think Chinese are interested in resolving this border dispute unless India develops very credible leverages and then talks to Chinese. And now, after learning from this recent episode, our bottom line should be: first, very clearly delineate the LAC, mark it on the map, sign it, create mechanism to ensure that neither side violates the LAC. If there are certain areas which are to be kept as demilitarized zones, or you want to have a joint mechanism till we are able to reach a permanent solution, let's get into that. But this time over, we should not be led by Chinese up the garden path. Otherwise, we'll have another Galwan, another 2 to 3 years.
So what do you propose, sir? What do you propose? The learnings from not just 2020, but learnings from, the thorny past that the two sides share. What would be your, let's say, the top 2, 3 strategic focus areas going forward?
First is maintain status quo ante. You can't talk by putting a sort of a pistol on my head. Restore the status quo ante. Then let's delineate clearly on the maps what is your perception of LAC, what is our perception of LAC. Then work out a mechanism either to sort of not to get into these areas for the timing by either side, or have some joint mechanism worked out when both sides are able to jointly patrol this area till we are able to arrive at a permanent solution. If Chinese do not agree for that, then we must have a relook at our entire gambit of our relations with China. And then we have other options about one China policy and our relations with the Western world, particularly United States of America. If we have to make that hard choice, if Chinese are not amenable to a rational dialogue and they want to browbeat and bully us, then we'll have to exercise those other choices.
All right, Major General B.K. Sharma, thank you so much for this very exhaustive discussion on what lies ahead in terms of Indian strategy. More importantly, to understand the Chinese equation, you've got to step back, take a look at what really has been our ties the last 50 years. Thank you so much for this exhaustive session, and we'll continue these series of strategic dialogues in association with USI, the attempt being to declutter and explain to our viewers what really is the strategic importance and the strategic issues that are really being discussed here. Thank you so much, General Sharma.